I'm Madelyn Blair, and today's show, we're going to be talking with Shelly Lombard, who will explore the question, just how important is time spent building relationships? As part of this, she'll talk about schmooze. And if you don't like the word schmooze, find out why it's going to be your next newest strategy. After my conversation, I'll be talking about one of the most exciting projects I have had the pleasure of doing. So stay tuned. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about unlocking the resilient leader in you. You know, I have about 200 people who I would miss sorely if they left my world suddenly. Some I talk with regularly, some only seldom, and yet the months or even years between don't seem to count because of our history together. Yet there are thousands of people in my directory who would actually recognize my name and answer the phone if I called. We all have those kinds of lists. As I look at these lists, I am struck with the question, how did I ever get to meet that many people? And what did I do or still do to maintain those relationships? What I do know is that there are people who stand out as ones who opened a door for me, gave me a chance, offered introductions, supported me when life handed me a major challenge. They helped me cover the gap. Did I offer as much help to them as they have offered me? I'm not sure I can answer that question, but I do know that today I have a guest who will be talking about the essential nature of building relationships in our business life. Let me bring her on screen and introduce you to Shelly Lombard. Shelly, welcome to Unlocked.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Oh, likewise. Well, let me tell the audience a bit about you. Shelly Lombard worked on Wall Street for over 35 years. My goodness, and you've survived. When she began her career, she was one of only a handful of women who specialized in investing in distressed companies. From 2003 to 2010, Shelly was one of the most quoted automotive analysts on Wall Street, frequently appearing in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and on CNBC. After her Wall Street career, Shelly began serving on corporate boards, including the board of Bed Bath & Beyond. Shelly recently launched Schmooze, which supports and encourages professional women to build their network of business relationships in order to close the gap between where they are and the career gap goals they want. In addition to offering masterclasses, Schmooze hosts Schmooze events. My goodness, you can't say that too often, can you? Events that are alternatives to the golf outings and sports tickets that men use to network. And by the way, those are often paid for by their companies. So let's find out how we can do it for ourselves. Shelly Lombard, so happy to have you on the show.
I'm excited to be on.
Good. Well, you know, I always like to give my guest a chance to really talk about their amazing paths that direct us and get my attention, get on the show. Would you share just a bit of how and why you came to where you are today and your current mission?
Sure. So I started my career as a writer. And after several years, I thought, okay, I'm never going to make enough money to get ahead. And so I decided to go to business school. I'd taken an accounting class and an econ class undergrad and done pretty well. That was a red herring, as they say. So I decided to get my MBA in finance, and I moved to New York to go to Columbia, and it was really tough for me. A lot of the people in the MBA program were people who had been analysts on Wall Street for 2 years, so they understood things that were totally new to me, like the concept of present value or discounted cash flow. So I really struggled my way through, and ended up getting a job working in banking, and actually absolutely loved it. And I did that for about 35 years. My specialty eventually became investing in companies that were in financial distress. And after my Wall Street career ended, and I can talk about that in a minute because that was a light bulb moment for me. That's what led me to start Schmooze. So right now, what I'm doing is working on Schmooze. I founded Schmooze roughly about a year and a half ago, and then I also serve on a couple of corporate boards.
Fantastic. Well, that word schmooze, it often has a bad rap. So I wonder, just take a minute, give us a better definition of schmooze.
Yeah, Schmooze is, I view it as building a network. And to build a network, or you can call it building a community of people. And I think when people think of schmoozing, or sometimes just plain networking, they think of it as being manipulative. But I think whether it's manipulative or not starts with you. So for me, I believe in, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. So when people reach out to me, like, can you introduce me to this one, etc., I always try to help. And I spend probably, I probably 3 times a week, I talk to women who are interested in being in corporate boards, or women who are dealing with career issues. Not that I'm an expert, but I'm willing to spend the time and to introduce them to other people in my network. The reason I say that is because if you approach networking that way, you will think of it less as being manipulative and more as being helpful. What you're trying to do is establish long-term relationships, not expecting anything to come from them. So whether you believe in the golden rule or you believe in karma, etc., it will come back to you from someone else. So I think people also confuse schmoozing with being inauthentic. And so I think people, don't want to be the kind of person who gets ahead on their smile alone. So we've all worked with those kinds of people who are not particularly good at what they do, but because of their relationships and their ability to manage up, they've kind of been promoted well beyond their capabilities. That is not what schmoozing is. That is not what networking is. So if you can basically back up your relationships, you're not being manipulative because you're not doing the job, but you're expecting to get promoted because you're hanging out and playing golf with people. That's manipulative, and I wouldn't consider that schmoozing. Schmoozing is kind of the layer on top of doing a really good job. And so I don't think of schmoozing as manipulative, just to summarize, because one, I'm willing to help other people and not expect it to come back from them. It may come back in some other way. So I schmooze to build a community, not just for myself, but that I can offer introductions to other people, and I'm willing to do that. And the second thing is, first, you have to be good at what you do. So the people who just depend on schmoozing to get ahead, those are the people that we want to distance ourselves from, or we don't want to be like. And so schmoozing is just a layer on top of already being good at what you do.
There are two things you said, Shelly, that I just love. One was that you do good things for people, not expecting any return. I read a book one time called The Gift, and it was all about the fact that oftentimes in our culture, when we give somebody a gift, we expect one back. And the book is all about other cultures where giving a gift has nothing to do with a transaction of getting something back, but rather to help the community.
Yes.
Because you're a part of the community. So I loved your comment. And oftentimes when you do that, it frees you to do a lot more for people. At least it does for me.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. And I think, the schmoozing is necessary because People, your bosses, your coworkers don't always see what you're doing. They're doing their own jobs
Yes.
and working with clients and doing whatever they do. So I think this, and I think women are particularly vulnerable to this thought. If I just keep my head down and do a great job, somebody will notice. Even if your boss has the best intentions, he or she may not have time to pay attention to you in the granular. So that's why your relationships, not just outside of your firm, but inside of your firm, are so important, because people are not thinking about you like that, for lack of a better word. We obsess over ourselves and think other people are obsessing over us. But sometimes you sit across from your boss in the annual review and you can tell that person has no idea what you've been spending the last couple of months on. So schmoozing is really building relationships. It's not glad handing. It's not kissing up. It's building relationships with people, so that people promote, they refer, they do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. That's the whole marketing thing. Get to know me, like me, trust me. And that's the area you want to be in, where your boss, the people internally and externally, they know you, they like you, and they trust you. And they trust you because you're doing good work to begin with.
Your word granularity, I liked that. This aspect of making sure others can see what you have done, and the fact that you have building a relationship. It's what happens in that is that you talk to that other person, you tell them what's happening in your life, and they get to know what you're doing. And you're absolutely right. You've got to be doing good work. I think of all the people that know me. I mean, I'll go to a conference and somebody will say, "You're Madelyn." Well, that's part of it. But it's because what I've done has given them some value. And it's the other piece that I thought of. I used well, I shouldn't say I used to. I did a research study on performance evaluations of women versus men. And what we learned in that was that invariably the male would describe what they did in detail, and the woman would expect the other person to know. And in fact, it was exactly what you said. The manager probably didn't see either of them. But if they didn't have the evidence in front of them, then all they would say was, "Gee, she's really fun to have around." Well, that doesn't get you promoted.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. And you know what? Back to the thought of being able to articulate, to have those relationships and using them as an opportunity to articulate what you're doing. I came from a family, I'm the first generation to work in corporate America. My parents were both teachers. So they talked about getting a great education, they talked about working hard, but nobody knew anything about, didn't even think about relationships in the workplace. That was not their world. And so, this whole thought that you can kind of keep your head down and do your work and not have relationships with people and let people know what you're working on and what your team is doing. If you're concerned about how you come across, give a lot of credit to your team and talk about what the we has accomplished if you're concerned about that. But again, I say the work comes first. And I usually start when I talk about schmooze saying, "You're already amazing. You're ambitious, but to close the gap between what you want and where you'd like to go, whether that's a board seat, whether that's a promotion, whether that's a career pivot, you need relationships." And so you start with, "You're already amazing." If you're not amazing and you're struggling, you probably should do something else. But if you're already amazing, you're ambitious, relationships can close the gap between where you are in your career and where you'd like to be.
I was wondering, Shelly, can you tell us a story of either yourself or maybe someone who benefited from having built a relationship and closing that gap?
Yep. So what I will say is this. I have a LinkedIn newsletter, free on LinkedIn. I interview women who did what I didn't know how to do. So one of the impetuses for me to start Schmooze was to help women prevent the mistakes that I made. So I'll give you an example of one of my mistakes, but to look at the good stuff, I'll summarize real quickly what women have told me when I interview them. So I I was working for Chase Bank when it merged with Chemical. And there was a meeting, rah, rah, let's get together team for everybody vice president and above. And I think I was the only woman of color in the room. And so, but that made me stand out. So the top guy, who was very personable and very effective, he knew my name. And so when I would get on the elevator, he'd be like, "Hi, Shelly." And he was big on FaceTime. He liked to walk around the trading floor in the evening around 7 o'clock and see who was still working. And he would always greet me, but I would say hi and put my head down and keep working. He was reaching out for a relationship, and I had no idea how to make that happen, or I didn't think it was necessary. And so I probably would still be working at Chase, which became JP Morgan, if I had had mentorship or sponsorship or allyship from somebody like him. Now, my work had to be good, but he was clearly reaching out. The women who I interview who have done it the right way have been very careful about and strategic about building those relationships. They know it's not just about doing good work, it's about the relationships internally and externally. So most of them have had one or two people who were really helpful to their careers. And an ally who becomes a champion, who becomes a mentor, who becomes a sponsor. And they also had an extensive network inside the company. I've interviewed women who said, "I never had to ask for a promotion. Somebody always tapped me on my shoulder and said, you'd be great for this." That's what we want. So obviously she was doing great work and somebody saw her. She knew people in the company. She wasn't hiding in her office, keeping her head down. She was out and about, and somebody tapped her and said, "You'd be great for this." So she had a long career in a male-dominated industry because she was very conscious and strategic about not just being good, but about building relationships and being seen at work.
That's a remarkable story that you tell of not recognizing that your that your boss was actually reaching out to you.
Yeah, and he was very senior. He was my boss's boss's boss. Like he
Wow.
was the head of the whole shebang.
Mhm.
And so, the fact that I was this Black woman stood out. He remembered my name, and I never, ever said to myself, you know what? He's, walking around the trading floor. He's talking to me. How can I make conversation? Now, my issues, in addition to being the first generation to work in corporate America in my family, I'm also shy and I'm an introvert. So if I can avoid talking to people, I will definitely do so. So, but I've learned now to ways to work around that because it's so necessary to build those relationships.
As you said that, I thought to myself, I'm not necessarily shy, and I do reach out, but I was raised to never uh, do any self-aggrandizement.
Right.
So I could not tell them even great successes, important things, because that was just not necessary. And it took me years to realize that I could talk about it. And it wasn't about showing that you're proud or beyond yourself. So
Yes.
interesting the
Yeah.
different ways.
Yeah.
But there's another little catch to all this, and that is, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, is that you'll look around the table and you'll be the only woman in the room, and those working relationships with men are absolutely critical to get the job done. Is there a difference from your perspective between how women develop relationships and how men develop relationships?
So I think women, we're raised to be nice girls and be nice. And I think that we don't ever want to be seen as being transactional. Whereas men go to play golf and it's understood. We're getting together because we may do some business together in the future. And women don't want to do that. Now, let me say, caveat, I don't really try to build relationships with anybody I don't like. I have to just be honest. Like I have, not that many, but on Wall Street, you have a handful of people. You're like, okay, if I never see them again, that's fine. So I won't say I made it a point not to keep in touch, but I didn't bother to keep in touch. But I think women put a lot more value on being genuine, being nice, and they kind of fear being looked at as being transactional. I don't think you have to be cutthroat transactional, but I do think we should get past that a little bit. Because, like I said, guys know, like if you want to be a partner at a law firm, you have to bring in business. So they know if I invite you to dinner, if I invite you to the basketball game, if I invite you to play golf, I might not go in for the kill right then, but I'm expecting that we're going to do some business together eventually. And I think that's harder for women because of the way we're raised. And I think we're going to have to get over that, because if you want to be a partner at a law firm, if you want to be a successful investment banker, most of those places you have to bring in business, and that revolves around relationships with other women who are top in their field, as well as other men who are top in their field. And so it's a limiting belief. And so there is a place for genuineness and niceness. And I do that when I open. I just talked to someone this morning who we used to work at the same place, and he's looking, and I said, look, my Rolodex, my LinkedIn version of Rolodex is open. If you see anybody in there that you'd like to connect with, let me know. I'm happy to make an introduction. So that's where I'm genuine, I'm nice, etc. But, you also, I think we have to think about the transactional nature of what we do sometimes, because if you don't do that, you won't make partner. You won't make managing director. You won't be able to move up the ladder if you're in a kind of client-facing role and you can't bring in business. So I think we have to kind of get past that.
It was interesting. It took a luncheon for me to get past that, because I invited a colleague to lunch, and I just wanted to, just to talk and get to know one another. And about halfway through, he said, "Now, what is it that you want from me?" He was very direct.
Right. Yeah. And that's kind of, that's helpful, to some extent. But I think you probably might have gone the whole lunch without putting an ask out there.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And so I am heartened now, because a lot of times women will, I'll talk to people who want to be on corporate boards, and I'll spend a half an hour doing a coffee chat, and they'll end by saying, now, what can I do for you? And it's my fault that I don't always have a ready ask. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll let you know, but, women are learning to say to each other, is there a way I can help you? Yeah. What can I do for you? And I think that will help us get to the point where we stop thinking about relationships purely like, oh, I just want to be nice and I just want to be liked, and think about, okay, transaction is also helping someone else. So we think of it, when you're selling something, you're trying to make partner, you're trying to, make MD, at an investment bank, as asking and getting, but it also, transactional is also when you can help someone else. So I said to the person I talked today, okay, how can I help you? And he was like, yeah, that's why I'm touching base. And I'm like, look, you want to look in my LinkedIn connections, anybody you want to meet, if I know them well enough, I'm happy to introduce you. So it was kind of a nice transaction.
Yeah. Now, there's another aspect to all this. What are the strategies that women can use to build relationships that signal it's only about business and not about monkey business?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and I'll use this as an opportunity. Several women have said to me, I've asked them how they developed those critical relationships, and a theme emerged: curiosity. So one woman who is a chief of staff now at a luxury brand, great job. I'd love to be working at a luxury brand. I think of all the perks involved. And she said, the way she started on her path was she was working with someone, and a gentleman made a presentation about technology in a meeting. And she was fascinated. So she reached out to him and said, I'd like to talk more about this. So he sat down with her. They had coffee. She asked him all about the business. And she wasn't in his department, but he was from another area. and they developed this organic relationship. And he gave her first job in technology, even though she had no tech background. That's a theme of the women that I talk to. So the reason I mention that is because if you are sitting and chatting and talking about business, being curious. So if this guy had come through the trading floor, there's no way he was thinking that I was, after monkey business. And I had started questioning him. Hey, I heard we're working on XYZ deal. How that's going? Because this guy loved the business and he loved doing deals. That would have been an icebreaker, and it would have opened the floodgates, because he probably would have stood there for a half an hour talking to me about deals, because he was a real deal guy. So I think with your questioning, you can make it clear what I'm here for is to be curious. And several women of the 68 I've interviewed over the last year and a half have said to me, curiosity. I think also, too, when you're having coffee or drink with someone who you don't know well, you just reached out to them after being at a conference, you can start with the niceties, but the niceties that kind of emphasize where you're coming from. Oh, so, I was just telling my husband the other day, or yeah, I had 2 kids in college, and I just came back from visiting my son in Columbus. That kind of thing, to kind of let people know you set the table. To tell you the truth, I have not had a lot of issues with that in my 30-year career, despite being on Wall Street. But what I would say is, you can kind of level set and set the expectations by, as you're talking, and making small talk. Yeah, my husband and I just got back from Belize or wherever. So that kind of starts it. And then you focus your questions, being very, very curious about what they're doing, what they're working on, etc. The thing I would say is, look, women get catcalled when we walk down the street. That doesn't mean you're not going to walk down the street. You got to keep walking. You toss your head and you keep going. And so I think, I won't say it's not a concern, even though I haven't experienced it. Amazingly enough, I saw a lot of other things on Wall Street, a lot of misogyny, a lot of sexism. I didn't have that one-on-one thing. But what I would say is, you can't let it stop you. That person then has identified themselves as somebody you will put on the outskirts of your network if they do. But I don't think you can let it stop you or handicap you or paralyze you from going forward, with the next time you want to reach out to somebody. Because if it did, you'd just be paralyzed. So I think, setting the table, talking about, if it's not your spouse or your kids, it's your significant other, whatever it is, make one up if you have to, the person I'm dating, whatever. And then it's being curious about the business. And that really seems to have bonded women to people who have helped, male and female. And then, like I said, you can't let fear of it stop you. If that person is that kind of person, you just kind of banish them from your network and keep moving.
Yeah. There's a kind of subtext to this of curiosity. I love the word, by the way, because highly resilient people are insatiably curious. They want to learn all the time. It suggests to me that if you target, and I don't use that term loosely, not in a pejorative way, if you target to develop a relationship with someone, you should also be doing some research and some back work, which you can with LinkedIn and with the internet, so that when you ask those curiosity questions, they come from a position of not just pure ignorance, but just a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. So what I find is the curiosity thing works really well internally. Externally, women didn't really talk about it, but I don't think there's anything wrong about being curious about what people are doing externally. But you're right. If you're using externally, you may want to have done some research. And I have we did a Schmooze mini massive class on reciprocity and using reciprocity to grow your network. And one of the things the woman said was, come prepared with something, not just to ask, how can I help you? But with, if you've looked at their profile, looked at their company, you can say, you know what, I know so and so. It might be beneficial if you meet them. And it doesn't have to be a huge thing. I tell the story about a woman who I think we met on LinkedIn. And she came to a Schmooze event, and she noticed I was handing out cupcakes at the end from a woman-owned bakery. And so she introduced me to a woman-owned cookie company. It's not like she introduced me to the Chinese Premier or somebody really important. She introduced me to a cookie company. But that is the way our relationship developed. And she continues to introduce me to people. So I think in terms of, yes, being curious, that was kind of a sidebar about reciprocity, but being curious internally, you're, talking about the project, things that can help the company, how you can do your job better. If it's external, then it's a little different, because you are going to need to kind of do some research about the person and what they do, and also do it so you can ask good questions, but also to reciprocate with a contact, with an article, with something that you think might be helpful based on your research of their background.
Yep. Well, that leads me in a way to my next question, which has to do with being a member of a board. Why should anyone strive to be on a board? How can they really prepare for that kind of role, and how do they secure that kind of position? It's a lot of questions.
Yeah, so I never paid any attention to corporate boards, even though I, invested in distressed companies. I paid attention to what the capital structure and the balance sheet looked like, and what the CEO was doing, was not paying any attention to the board. So a lot of women who approach me now, it's something that they have targeted. It's something they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I got my first board role and every subsequent role because of relationships. So there was another investor who invests in distressed companies who I've known since before my daughter was born, so over 30 years. And he said, I've got a position in this company, meaning a position as in an ownership interest in this company, a public company, but I own a lot of the securities. Would you be interested in a board role? And so I was at least savvy enough to say yes. I still had to go through the interview process, etc., but they would have never known me unless he had brought my name up. On that board, I met two other gentlemen who invited me to join two other boards. So I've been on 6 corporate boards. They have all been the result of a relationship. So before I even talk about why you should want to be on a board, the relationship piece is even more critical if you'd like to be a board director. I think it gives you 3 things. I think, look, a lot of women are using it. We're doing now what's called a portfolio career. So, I'm on one board. I'm an investor in this. I do some consulting. So if it's a nice piece as you get to my age, it's a nice part of a portfolio career. You get to influence policy. So, what's our maternity leave policy? What's our DE&I policy? That kind of stuff. You also get to use your brain. Strategic thinking. The role of a board member is to ask good questions that'll make management go, you know what, that's interesting, to point out things, to act as a sounding board. So it's a way to use your brain. You get compensated, whether it's a public or a private board, it's compensation. So that's why it's a popular piece of a portfolio career these days. And you make great contacts. So my position on that first board led me to 2 other boards, and they've been, relatively lucrative for me, because you get paid cash and you get paid stock. So it's a very popular thing for women to pursue now. There are not enough women on public company boards. Private boards, we don't have any data on it, but I've got to believe it's the same, if not worse. So it's certainly something. And the other thing is, it's great experience if you're working at another company. If your company allows you to be on a board, understanding the top down, how boards look at things, having a CEO report to you, that is knowledge and experience that is very helpful if you still have a day job.
There's a lot of benefits. I had never had them
Lot
enumerated to me before. So
Yes, a
clearly,
lot of benefits of being on board, which is why so many women are interested in them now. They really can help your career. I think Chief, the organization for kind of executive women, did a study and they talked about how beneficial boards were for women's careers.
I particularly liked your comment that one of the benefits is that you can ask good questions. Because I often think when I look at the policies of companies, I ask myself, are they aware that they live within a community, a society? They appear as if they're an island unto themselves. And it takes board members, if I understand you,
Yeah.
to really push that and say, what about X?
Yeah, you get on boards, they teach you, and people will go through board training. There's board training at Stanford and NYU and various places, and the NACD is the National Association of Corporate Directors. The term is noses in, fingers out. So you're not there to run the company. You're just there to oversee. The only person who reports directly to you is the CEO. So you're there to provide a sanity check, a sounding board, to ask good questions. When people ask me what's the main role of the board, I would say to ask good questions, which is harder than it seems. Because a lot of times, I've landed on boards and I am a financial expert. I'm not an expert in their industry. So I'm like, okay, is this a stupid question? I'm on a board where I'm like, okay, they're doing, some industrial thing. I'm like, is this a stupid question? So it's harder than it seems to ask good questions. The learning curve is very steep, but that's one reason why it keeps you on your toes, mentally and strategically, and it gives you a chance to use a lot of whatever it is you've learned during your career.
Have you have you experienced in your examples, your memberships, how the women on the board have changed things?
I have to say, on every board I've been on, well, almost every board I've been on, I've been either the only, I've been typically the only woman. There are not enough women on corporate boards. There are definitely some companies that have broken the mold. Bed Bath was one, mainly because, maybe because it was retailing and, women, that's a career path a lot of women take. But what I would say is, I can think of the 6 boards that I've been on, only 2 of them had other women. One has one other woman, and I haven't been on that board long enough to kind of see it. I just joined that board in February. And then the other one was Bed Bath, which unfortunately distressed company, so it fit with my background, but we couldn't save it. Just not enough women on boards, quite frankly. But I think that's why the push for more diverse boards, especially in retailing, et cetera. You want your board to reflect your customer base, And so I think I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, mainly because I'm the only woman in the room. I think one way, and this is a good one. So I ran into a woman who I used to be on a board with. She was one of the few. And like I said, of the 6 boards I've been on, 4 of them, there were no other women. 2 of them there were. And what she said to me, she was a very experienced board member who was on really top, boards of, large, prestigious companies. And she said to me, oh, when we interview, law firms, auditing firms, whatever, I always say, I want to see a diverse group of candidates. So what happens with audit firms when the person, the senior accountant or whoever has been in the seat for 6 years, it automatically has to transfer over to somebody else. And so one guy will just hand it to another guy. And what she said to me is, oh no, I always tell them I want to see for their replacement within the firm, I want to see some female candidates. And so I did that recently. I was on a board and the auditor was changing over. And I said to the person who was in place, who was actually, I can't remember if she was retiring or just moving on to another customer. I said to her, I'd love to see when you replace yourself and it was a female partner. I said, I'd love to see another female partner. You're the first female partner that I've dealt with in all my time on boards, and I'd love to see another one. So I think a guy probably wouldn't have done that, wouldn't have been conscious of that. But
Mhm.
that one board that I was on, that board member said that to me, and I've always remembered it. So that's something I will bring to future boards. Because think of it, you're doing that for your daughters. You're doing that for, in my case, you maybe your granddaughters. But I have a niece who is an accounting major. She's working at one of the big firms. Like, that is the kind of thing, making sure those women get in the room, and that Bob just doesn't hand off the assignment or the client to Sam. You want to be like, you know what? I'd like to see Sam, and I'd like to see Samantha as well. And that helps get them in the door. They're capable. It's just relationships are everything.
Yeah. Goes back to your earlier comment. You have to
Yeah,
do a good job.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, in the beginning. Uh, Listen, Shelly, you have just given us so much. I've taken more notes than I usually take. Uh, some of them are just really standing out to me. That what we called the schmoozing was the layer on the top of a good job. Excellent. I love that phrase. We have a few minutes. What would be your final thoughts for the women in my audience? They range, by the way, mostly from about 30 to about 60.
Relationships are everything. You and I know people like to do business with, as I said earlier, people that they know, like, and trust. As long as you're competent, you're good at what you do. If they know you, they trust you, they like you, that is the thing that helps you get the business instead of somebody else, helps you get the promotion or the job instead of somebody else. Relationships are critical. So what I would say is, the whole idea behind Schmooze is for me to tell women, don't do what I did. Do something different. These women that I interview, these 68 women that I've interviewed with more to come, here are some role models. Do that. Because every single one of them, I just interviewed a woman who said, I'm a terrible networker in a stereotypical form of networking, but I am kind, I'm open, I stay in touch with people. Those are the kinds of relationships. If you don't want to do the whole cocktail party schmoozing thing, relationships are still key. And so in this latest version of my newsletter, latest issue, which I just sent out on LinkedIn today, she talked about how she did it different. It grew organically, not as fast, but it still grew. And so I think that's really, really important. I had one last story. There's one woman I interviewed. She was the co-CEO of a beauty brand. She got on her first board because she had been in the fashion beauty industry for a long time, kept in touch with a male colleague that she had worked with. She and her husband and he and his wife would go out to dinner occasionally. He ended up being a CEO somewhere and invited her to join his board. So that's how she got her first board role. There are not enough women on public boards, and the women who are getting on some of it occasionally, it's headhunters, and you have organizations that are doing the heavy lifting in terms of training women and getting ready to be on boards. But those relationships is how most women get on boards. And I would say to women who are in their 30s, you want to start building and maintaining those relationships now. So that woman who I just mentioned had probably been friends with that guy for a long period of time before he got to be a CEO. And she said to her, would you be on my board? So long time. It's developing the relationships and maintaining them over time.
Shelly, I'm so happy that we have begun our relationship. And I just want you to know, if there's something that I can do for you, just let me know.
Thank you. Thank
You
you.
are welcome. And thank you so much again for being with us here on Unlocked.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. At least 25 years ago, I was very active in storytelling in organizations. I was leading international conferences on the subject and being a part of a volunteer group called Golden Fleece here in Washington, D.C., that set as its mission to bring storytelling in business into business. Now, the interesting thing about this group is that we met every month and we just talked about how we would do it, and we would experiment with it, and we would do our outreach to whatever anybody could come in. And of course, I did this conference every year. And after 10 years, we looked around and we discovered that the New York Times was talking about storytelling in business. The Wall Street Journal was, the Harvard Business Review was. And so we said, you know what? We achieved our mission. And we broke up. But for today's show, I thought to myself, but there were some really amazing things that happened as a result of those relationships. It turned out that during that time, there was a lot of severe attack on the United Nations. Now, you may believe that the United Nations is good, or you may not. That doesn't matter to me. To me, I saw it as an organization that was trying to help the world. And if you destroyed it today or dismantled it, you'd probably reinvent it tomorrow. And I decided I wanted to create something that would help people understand the value of the United Nations, and I wanted to do it through story. So I said, I'm going to create a video that would help viewers see the value of the United Nations. Now, my dream was to use stories to really help the critics see something in the story. So one evening at the Golden Fleece, I was sharing this dream with everybody. And I said, the problem is I can't get to the people who need to tell these stories because I think they need to be ambassadors. Ambassadors know this arena well. They've worked at the UN, and they can really tell legitimate stories that are both relevant and credible. Well, I don't know how to get to ambassadors, but there was someone in the room who had been there for a while. He'd seen what I had done, and he said, I can help you. Well, I was blown away because he ended up introducing me to a man by the name of John McDonald, a former ambassador. And I sat down with him and I told him my dream that I want to have sitting ambassadors in Washington, D.C. That know the UN and would share stories. Ambassador McDonald actually set it up so that there were 3 sitting ambassadors in Washington, D.C. who would do exactly that. Now, to set this up, I looked at the words that describe the United Nations. I had done my research. And you know, the United Nations, well, you may not know, but it is run by a charter. Just like the United States is run by the Constitution, UN has a charter. And just like the Constitution, it has a preamble. Now, a preamble is not part of the charter or the Constitution. It tells you why you have a Constitution or why you have a charter. But in there, I read the preamble to the UN Charter, and it said one of the things they wanted to do was to encourage the practice of tolerance and living together in peace with one another as good neighbors. Well, they understood exactly what I was saying, because if they could tell a story that related to those words from the Charter, there is no one in the UN who would not understand. And so one day at the French embassy in Washington, we all gathered, and for 2 hours, they told stories. Today, I want to show you one of those stories that was told by the ambassador at that time from Sweden. Story.
Well, first of all, let me say that the Charter is a beautiful document. I would say it's almost poetry for us diplomats. The story that I thought about was the story about this stone. This is a fictitious stone. The real stone is in Sarajevo. The background is, of course, the horrors of the Balkans, and in the end, fortunately, with the help of many actors, including the United Nations, the wars came to an end. I went to Banja Luka, where there had been a very strange form of destruction. Houses were standing, and just a couple of yards away, houses were destroyed. And it turned out that they had been destroyed because of the ethnic background of the different groups that had been living in these houses. My interpreter said that the worst example was the mosque, the Feraja Mosque, that had been standing there since 1540, one of the most beautiful Muslim cultural buildings in Europe. But it had been destroyed, evidently, during a couple of nights, exploded in the early 90s. And the leaders at the time, Karadzic, Mladic, and so forth, had ordered these stones from the mosque to be completely taken away. There should be no trace of this mosque. I had meetings with the prime minister at the time of that area, Republika Srpska, Mr. Dodik. He was not, of course, part of this past, but after the meeting I asked to see what was remaining of the mosque. And there was nothing remaining, they told me. There was a parking lot. But the interpreter on the other side said, no, there is a grass area. You can see the view from where the mosque stood. So I went down to that area, and then I just kicked with my shoes the turf, the grass. And I said to myself, there has to be stones somewhere beneath, since they had destroyed a full, complete mosque. And then with my fingers, I dug down and I found two small stones. And the interpreter almost cried, I noticed. And I picked up those stones, put them in my pocket, came back to Sweden and told the story to the Bosnian ambassador. I told an audience where I brought this stone that, to me, tolerance is also living side by side and respecting and accepting one's culture, history, and traditions. And I said, if ever there was anyone who would doubt that there had been a mosque in Europe, in Banja Luka, I could at least contribute to proving that indeed there was a mosque there, and that we in Europe have lived and hopefully will continue to live in peace together. And that was inspired by the word tolerance and good neighbors, and the words good neighbor in the UN Charter.
Well, first of all, you can tell that was that was filmed many years ago. Well, hundreds of people have been exposed to this simple story and come away with a new perspective. This would never have happened if it wasn't for 3 ambassadors who said yes to a man they trusted, to a man who said yes to my proposal only because someone he knew asked, to yet another person who knew me from watching what I had done in Golden Fleece and listened to my dream. Relationships made it happen. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. And if you're on YouTube, click the like button and subscribe. That helps me, and it helps others who are looking for information. Thanks for considering this. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock the resilient leader in you.